I've talked some in the past about the urbanite question. And urban areas, cities, form because the density of population increases the density of opportunities for exchange and production, proximity to suppliers and customers, and the low costs of engaging in production and trade in urban areas, and therefore the increasing economic opportunities from a concentration of population and capital. So that's why cities form. Some problems with this, however, are cities increase not only the density of opportunity, but the density of sensations. And so they attract sensation seekers and degeneracy, sexual perversion and licentiousness and substance abuse and all of these kind of pathologies, homosexuality, all of this stuff proliferates and thrives in cities to an extent that would be impossible outside of them. And, this has a lot to do with the density of sensations attracting sensation seekers. And at the same time, cities have the high density creates high costs, because there's a limited supply of things like space and a lot of demand. So cities have high cost of living, and that makes them, not conducive to family formation, and also relatively more attractive to sensation seekers and singles, and people living the child-free life. And so people will choose the city. They'll choose to live in the city in a tiny little apartment and have the prestige job or the status job that they think they want over, starting a family or marrying and having kids. And so cities are a genetic sink where talented people especially, move from the countryside into the cities for opportunity, but then don't reproduce. And they're mixed up with all these degenerate sensation seekers who are, creating a toxic stew of urban degeneracy. And so cities are very unhealthy and unwholesome places for all of these reasons and more. And they're destructive genetically and demographically. And the urban elites, to ameliorate some of these problems, they try to bring in talent from overseas as well, and not just talent, but underclasses that they can pay to vote in certain ways and override the natural preferences and interests of rural populations. And so cities are extremely problematic, especially in the West, where we have democracy. But one place where they're not as problematic is China, where they don't have democracy. They have an authoritarian government that's firmly entrenched. It's a monopoly, one-party government, and has very long-term incentives because it is entrenched. Its power is not threatened on a semi-annual basis by electoral processes, and so it's only accountable basically to produce results to keep the population from revolting. And so very secure government, and therefore has very long-term incentives, and the individuals within it have very long-term incentives. They're focused on more than just the next election cycle. And, part of what they focus on is maintaining, the greatness and national character of their country and building it up. And so they enforce strict moral values. They are able to institute eugenic policies and incentives to, the urbanization of China has led to a vast decline in fertility and reproduction, and part of that has been, accelerated by, like the one child policy, and so on and so forth, deliberately accelerated. They've backed off from the one child policy, but the urbanization still has a natural suppressive effect on, fertility and reproduction. However, despite that, it seems like with the authoritarian measures, they can prevent some of the dysgenic effect. So even if the population of China is going to be contracting in the near future, and then for the foreseeable future after that, it doesn't necessarily have to be degrading in quality. And so they can control some of that, and they have the incentive to do so, and they have the ability, because it is an authoritarian government. They're not vote farming. They want to preserve and increase the capital value of what they govern. And so, instead of having these pernicious incentives that a democratic government they have fundamentally healthy incentives. So for all of these reasons and more, and they lack the, let's say Western cultural and religious and political hostility towards eugenia. That they're not ashamed of eugenia. They have programs underway at Chinese medical research companies to do selection based on intelligence for embryos before they're implanted in the mother. So this is a therapeutic fertility procedure that they're investigating and developing at the moment. I don't know how close it is to implementation, but they're working on it. And there doesn't seem to be the kind of hostility. This is just common sense to them. If you can have smarter kids, why wouldn't you? And so even if they're gonna undergo demographic contraction as their population starts to age, and if they're not already undergoing demographic contraction already, but with 1.4 billion or whatever they're up to people now, over 1 billion people, they have some breathing room there. They don't have to worry about demographic contraction, and they have a trivial number of foreigners in their country, and they're not immigrants. They're not people that they're intending to assimilate and live there forever. They're guests. They're all on short-term visas practically. I heard one time somewhere that there's only something like 1,400 people in China who are either naturalized citizens or have permanent residency. Like 1,400 out of 1.4 billion. That's nothing. It's more restrictive than Japan. It's easier to become a Japanese citizen than a Chinese citizen, or a permanent resident alien of Japan than a permanent resident alien of China. So they do have some foreigners living and working and studying and doing various things in China, but they are not immigrants. They are guests. And so they don't have to worry about being replaced or overwhelmed by foreigners as their population contracts, as it will due to urbanization, almost certainly. But, with the population that they have and the closed immigration policy, it seems like they can probably manage that for centuries, probably. And who knows, maybe they can figure out a way to, reverse even the demographic contraction by then. And it seems like they're set to, that demographic contraction won't necessarily be dysgenic. They might even be able to maintain or even improve the average genetic quality of their population as it gets smaller, which is the exact opposite of what we're doing. So the urban question, we're going to have to confront this head on and do it pretty soon in order to survive in the West. But China's got a lot more time on their hands and can confront these problems a lot more gently and can maintain an industrial and urbanized society and civilization a lot longer than we can. And they're going to, maybe even take the lead at some point in the not too distant future on things like, economics, on things like technology, industry. They may surpass us. People have been saying that for a long time, but this looks pretty realistic at this point. So, China's looking set to maintain for a while. I know there are rifts, there are instabilities in Chinese, culture and politics and everything that, don't always get the attention that they deserve, but it looks like they can probably maintain the course they're on right now for a while, generations, maybe centuries. Whereas we've got some really hard questions to confront and address and some really drastic changes to make in a relatively short time frame if we're going to even pull through. So this urban question that we have to grapple with, they're nowhere near having to grapple with as hard as we are, and they're going to be able to maintain that urban civilization for a long time to come. And we need to be careful not to fall too far behind, even when we address our own urban question, or we may wind up in their thrall, which we really do not want to be. We want to maintain our independence. We want to maintain our sovereignty. We do not want to fall as far behind the Chinese as they once fell behind us. We don't want to do it. So it's going to be a really interesting tightrope to walk in the coming century and beyond. If you like the channel, if you like the content, like, subscribe, share, and check out some links in the description I have to support the channel as well. Really appreciate all your contributions and your attention.